Well, hope everybody's doing good. Good to be able to come to you again. Sure love to see your faces. But I pray everybody's doing well, staying healthy, and being able to be clean from this virus. So if you'd like to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, we're going to pick up there in just a moment. Before we do, I'd like to kind of sum up the previous chapter with a few takeaways. Number one, when we divide our churches, we multiply quarrels and the party spirit and pride. These only explode a church's bond, leaving only smoky remains. Number two, when we subtract the gospel when we add display of the flesh. When our emphasis is on personalities or preaching styles, as the Corinthians, then it dims the light of the gospel. And then number three, when we exalt Christ, we lift up the cross and become obscure in its shadow. The love of Jesus flows best through a humble vessel that seeks to lift him up without having to be noticed. And that's all what's taking place in Corinth. They're dividing, they're quarreling, they're elevating men of the flesh and failure to lift up Christ. I like what old-timey preachers are said to have said when they would pray, Lord, help me hide behind the cross. And that really is very powerful. The point is the message of the cross, not the man himself. And so you don't want to get in the way of the message that you're using and that you're speaking. So that brings us to verse 6 of chapter 2. And keep in mind what he has said before. Verse 4, my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of spirit and power, that your faith should not be in wisdom of men, but in the power of God. So he then says, however, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, nor the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. And he will go on to say that had they known this, they would not have crucified the Christ. I think the rulers he's talking about are those who were instrumental in crucifying Christ. So Paul's telling them their wisdom should not rest, or their faith should not rest on the wisdom of men, but the power of God. And so Paul said, what I want you to understand is that doesn't mean that you become irrational and you just throw your mind out the window. He's careful to state the message about Christ requires great faith, and that means you have to think. Paul was careful to state that this hadn't sprung up suddenly. This didn't just happen. This is part of the plan of God. In fact, he will call it in verse 7, we didn't speak the wisdom of God in the mystery, the hidden wisdom, but we speak the wisdom of God in the mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained for the glory of the ages. This goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, where it was prophesied that the serpent would bruise the heel of the seed of woman, but the time would come in which the seed of woman would crush the head of Satan. Even the prophets speak about the Gentiles in Acts chapter 15, when there's a great discussion about circumcision and whether it's essential for Gentiles to be circumcised in order to be saved. James will speak up and quote Amos, and Amos refers to the Gentiles. So Paul's saying, you don't have to throw your mind out the window here. This isn't something ridiculous and irrational that you just have to throw your mind out the window and do no thinking at all. This was planned before God. This doesn't just happen suddenly. And then also he will talk about the mystery here. That's a play on what's taking place at Corinth as well. At Corinth, they had their guilds, they had their mysteries that were associated with many of their pagan gods that were there. And what would happen is you have, as a part of being a part of their heathen mysteries, is they would come in as someone on a very initial, they called the initiated state. And as they would elevate themselves going up the ladder, they might come to the 32nd degree, and there they would be fully enlightened and be told that everything back down on the lower rung that you were told really wasn't true. And so Paul is playing on that word mystery that these Corinthians are struggling with. Among the Greeks, mystery meant not something obscure or incomprehensible, but a secret imparted only to the initiated, what is unknown until it is revealed. So the word connected with mystery of the mystery of the religion in these Hellenistic times. These religions were very popular in the first century, consisted of rites, celebrations which were only known to or practiced by those who were initiated. In fact, in Tarsus itself, it was a seat of Mithra religion, and the chief center of Paul's activities in Corinth, Antioch, and Ephesus were headquarters of mystic religion. And so we're not surprised that he should borrow then from that. These mysteries appeal to the emotion rather than intellect and offer to their followers the mystical union with deity through death to life, thus securing for them a blessed immortality. So there's great symbolism in what was involved there. And Paul said, the rulers of this age are ignorant about this, the gospel. They're so wrapped up in their advance in their mysteries and their heathen practices that they don't even realize the hidden wisdom of God is being revealed to them. It's not a hidden wisdom that you can sit and you can learn. You can study for 29 years and figure out on your own. It's a mystery that's been revealed. In fact, he will say revealed to us in chapter 2. Notice how he words that in chapter 2. He will say in verse 10, but God has revealed them to us through his Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. So, it's a mystery. Also, the rulers didn't understand. Had they understood what they were doing, they would not have crucified the Christ. Their spiritual depth perception comes from their experiential knowledge of God, not just from intellectual comprehension of truths. So they fail to have a great, deep understanding of what Paul is saying. Here are the rulers who executed Jesus. If they'd understood who they were executing, they wouldn't have done it. But the rulers of this age are passing away. Paul preaches a wisdom not of this age, not of the age that's passing away, but Paul preaches a wisdom that will endure. And so he begins to share with the Corinthians how that takes place when he says, eye has not seen nor heard nor entered the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. So let's back up and kind of put this together. In verses 1 through 5, he talks about the wisdom that he speaks. And now he says, this is where I got this wisdom. This didn't come from your mysteries. This didn't come from your experiences. This is not something you can just sit down and learn on your own. This is the wisdom of God. And I preach to you with power and spirit of the wisdom of God. And where did it come? It doesn't come from what you hear, what you see, and what enters into your heart. But God's prepared it for a long time ago. And so Paul says the unbelievers cannot gain insight through mere observation. His wisdom can't be acquired empirically. And so he said, God revealed them to us through the Spirit. The Spirit searches all things, yea, the deep things of God. And so now he's going to talk about how the Spirit then searches the mind of God. Just as you can't know the mind of a person unless that person speaks to you and tells you what's going on. You can't know the mind of a person just by sitting there and looking at you. You might try to read facial responses, body language, but you can't know what a person's thinking until they tell you. But God's saying, I'm revealing my mind to you. The Spirit's revealing my mind to you. And you can know my mind. But it's not something you can know on a basis of something empirical that you've done, some kind of testing you've done, or some kind of education from some sort of prestigious school that you might have gone to. And so, or they might have attended. And so, how else would you have known? Paul said, this is the wisdom I'm seeking. The wisdom I'm speaking didn't come from me. It's not of the world. I don't speak, verse 12, we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might know the things that have been freely given to us by God. And we said, we freely speak these things. So here's the wisdom. The wisdom is the word of God that he's receiving from the Holy Spirit, and he's speaking spiritual things with spiritual words. But the natural man can't receive them because he doesn't discern them that way. The natural man here is not the totally depraved man. The natural man here is not the fleshly man. The natural man here is the man, if you go back to chapter 1, verse 18 and follow through, the man who regards the message of the cross as foolishness. The man who will not hear the wisdom of God. The man who will, in rejecting the wisdom of God, crucify the Christ. The natural man is the man who will not appraise things, evaluate things, spiritual things with spiritual words. And the reason he tells us is because they're foolishness to him, verse 14. So again, you see that word foolishness, foolishness of God, the message, the foolishness of the message, the foolishness of the message preached, the foolishness of God, the weakness of God. And that kind of threads itself on down that here's the natural man who regards all these things that I'm speaking from that's the wisdom of God that were revealed to me as foolishness. And so then he comes down to verses 15 and 16. And it says, but he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is rightly judged by no one. For who has known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. And so the spiritual that receive these words is in contrast to the natural man who won't receive the words. And because he receives spiritual things with spiritual words, he's not judged by anyone. He's judged by God. And then he asked this rhetorical question, did God ask you for advice about this? Can you know the mind of God? Who has known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him? No, it's just the opposite. The Lord has instructed us. The Lord instructed Paul. And so here you have him speaking to the Corinthians relative to this thing of a wisdom of men versus the wisdom of God. Where do you get that wisdom from God? Now, I said in the introduction, I think the book of 1 Corinthians is a relevant book today, perhaps one of the most relevant books that we have in the New Testament because of what it addresses. It talks about the wisdom of men versus the wisdom of God. That's a real seductive thing. Our young people who go off from their sterile homes to colleges, and they face teachers who have letters after their name because of some acquisition of knowledge through educational pursuits. And they begin to challenge things that our young people have heard and begin to convince our young people that the wisdom of God is greater than the wisdom of men. Because how could this man or woman who has this degree be so dumb? How could they miss it and we get it? And so there's a great deal of confidence put in the teacher. And that teacher has an effect because it's the wisdom of men. The wisdom of men is clever. It's not simple like the message of the cross. And so they hear these things that challenge their thinking, what they've always believed, what they've been taught since they were little. And the wisdom of men begins to be more persuasive. When I was teaching this in class, the question was asked, what can we do about that? The local church providing its Bible classes is at best supplemental. I don't care what the class is, whether it's some topic that we think our young people need or whether we're just working through a text like we are now. What they need is the text of 1 Corinthians. What we need to teach them is the wisdom of God and the strength and power of the wisdom of God versus the wisdom of men, and how men will use cleverness of speech to try to seduce them. And that doesn't just happen in the college classroom. It happens in the religious world too. And so teaching our young people about the wisdom of God is so important. And I really think that begins in the home. And it doesn't begin when they're seniors in high school. It begins when they're young. Implanting in their hearts the wisdom of God and helping them see how it is greater than the wisdom of men. Taking them to a book like 1 Corinthians and see what Paul is doing in Corinth in a place where they highly regarded the wisdom of men, the cleverness of speech, the way they turned a phrase. They highly regarded their teachers. Here these were highly regarded people, and they were leading people away from Christ. And Paul's trying to win them. And he's having some success, but it's a struggle because this is a pretty challenging place, Corinth is. So we need to teach them about the wisdom of men and what the wisdom of men is versus the wisdom of God. One of our young people was in that class I referred to just a moment ago when the question was asked. Tyler Hale, who just returned from college, Texas A&M, he and his wife, and now members here again after Tyler was raised here, went off to school, he's come back now working in the area. And Tyler made the observation when the question was asked, what can we do? It's there if they want it. They have to want to. And that was in Corinth. They had to want the message. The mighty and the noble didn't want it. The rulers of this age, he refers to, that crucified Christ, didn't want it. They didn't want to understand it. It didn't fit what they wanted. And sometimes the wisdom of God doesn't fit what we want. We say the gospel is for all. Potentially that's true. But it wasn't for all in Corinth. Practically it's not so. Why? Because the wisdom of God is regarded as foolishness. I mean, you think back to how God has worked in this world. You think back to men marching around a wall and blowing their trumpets and the wall come down. That's foolishness. Nobody plans a strategy like that militarily. You think about a man that has got leprosy and there's no cure for it, but he's told to dip in a river 7 times he'll be cleansed. Hey, you think that would have been regarded? What if someone came up to one of us, if God forbid we had COVID-19, and said, if you'll go out here and to the lake and dip 7 times, you'll be healed. That person be laughed off the street. What if you had COVID-19 and you had a prophet like Naaman had telling him go dip 7 times, and you did, and then you were healed? No medical establishment, no medical team would tell you that you were healed that way. Can you imagine how people must have responded to Naaman, who people knew he was a leper? He was a captain of the army. He led people. And how he's not a leper. Why? Because he dipped 7 times. People regarded that as foolishness. The way God has saved man, the way God has always worked among men, the wisdom of men have always regarded as foolishness. That's why, again, I think this message is so important for us today. So if we tie this together from where we started, they're having problems with their teachers. They're dividing over their teachers. And they're dividing over their teachers who have this clever way of speaking. And they're more interested in the form than the substance. And Paul says, I come not worried about the form, I come with the substance. And the substance is what I want you to hear. But the substance doesn't come with cleverness of speech, because that gets in the way of the cross. It comes from the wisdom of God, and that wisdom of God has power. And the wisdom of God is about the cross, and it's not a new message. It's not something just popped up, and all of a sudden it just occurred here. This has been the plan of God all along, to save both Jew and Gentile. The Jews may stumble on it, the Greeks may ask for more wisdom, but this is what God had planned, and I received this. Not because of something I tasted, not because of something I touched, not because of something I saw, not because of something I heard. I received this because the Holy Spirit revealed this to me, revealed the mind of God. And you can only discern spiritual things with spiritual words. You'll never do it through the natural man. You'll never do it through the things people call wise. You're never going to do it through the wisdom of men. And so only the spiritual are able to receive this word. And so he's trying to, again, build the case. That comes through Christ. That doesn't come through Paul. It doesn't come through Apollos. It doesn't come through Cephas. Well, hope you can log in next time, and we'll pick up with chapter 3.